The Berlin City Palace was a royal and imperial palace in the center of Berlin, the historical capital of Prussia, and subsequently Germany. It was located on the Museum Island at Schlossplatz, opposite the Lustgarten park. It was the winter residence of the Kings of Prussia and the German emperors. In 2013, work started on reconstruction and a part of the exterior of the palace has been rebuilt. The completion is expected in 2019. The palace was originally built in the 15th century and changed throughout the next few centuries. It bore features of the Baroque style, and its shape, finalized by the middle 18th century, is attributed to German architect Andreas Schlüter, whose first design is likely to date from 1702, though the palace incorporated earlier parts seen in 1688 by Nicodemus Tessin. It served as a residence to various electors of Brandenburg. It was the principal residence and winter residence of the Hohenzollern Kings of Prussia from 1701 to 1918. After the unification of Germany in 1871, it was also the central residence for the German emperors. It became a museum following the fall of the German Empire in 1918. The palace was heavily damaged by Allied bombing in World War II. Although it could have been repaired, the palace was demolished in 1950 by the German Democratic Republic authorities, despite criticism. Following the reunification of Germany, it was decided to rebuild the entire exterior of the palace in the original style except for one side. The new building will have the cubature of the former palace and include authentically reconstructed facades on 3 of the 4 exterior sides of the building. The interior will be modern, but the facades of one of the courts will be in the original style. However, the floor plan has been designed to allow potential future reconstruction of notable historical rooms. The building will house the Humboldt Forum Museum and Congress Complex, and is scheduled to be finished the 14th of September 2019. History up to 1871. The palace replaced an earlier fort, a castle guarding the crossing of the Spree River at Cologne, a neighboring town which merged with Berlin in 1710. The castle stood on Fisher's Island, as the southern end of the Museum Island in the Spree is known. In 1443, Frederick II, Iron-Toothed Margrave and Prince-Elector of Brandenburg, laid the foundations of Berlin's first fortification in a section of swampy wasteland north of Cologne. At the completion of the castle in 1451, Frederick moved there from the town of Brandenburg. The main role of the castle and its garrison in this period was to establish the authority of the Margraves over the unruly citizens of Berlin, who were reluctant to give up the medieval privileges to a monarchy. In 1415, King Sigismund had involved the Hohenzollern princes with Brandenburg, and they were now establishing the power and withdrawing electoral privileges which the cities had attained in the Brandenburg interregnum of 1319 to 1415. The castle also included a chapel. In 1454, Frederick II, after having returned via Rome from his pilgrimage to Jerusalem, made the castle chapel a parish church, richly endowing it with relics and altars. Pope Nicholas V ordered Stephan Bodecker, then Prince-Bishop of Brandenburg, to consecrate the chapel to Erasmus of former It. On the 7th of April 1465, at Frederick's request, Pope Paul II attributed to St. Erasmus Chapel a canon law college named Stift zu Ehren unserer lieben Frauen, des Heiligen Kreuzes, St. Petri und Pauli, St. Erasmi und St. Nikolai. This collegiate church became the nucleus of today's Evangelical Supreme Parish and Collegiate Church, adjoining the site of the castle. In 1538, the Margrave came to demolish the palace and engaged the master builder Cuspith to build a new and grander building in the Italian Renaissance style. After the 30 Years' War, Frederick William, the Great Elector, embellished the palace further. In 1688, Nicodemus Tessin designed courtyard arcades with massive columns in front. Not much is known about the alterations of 1690 to 1695, when Johann Neering was the court architect. Martin Grunberg continued the alterations in 1695 to 1699. In 1699, the Elector Frederick III of Brandenburg appointed the architect Andreas Schluter to execute a second plan in the Italian manner. Schluter's first design probably dates from 1702. He planned to rebuild the palace in the Protestant Baroque style. His overall concept, in the shape of a regular cube enclosing a magnificently ornamented courtyard, was retained by all the building directors who succeeded him. In 1706, Schluter was replaced by Johann Friedrich Osander von Goth, who designed the western extension of the palace, doubling its size. In all essentials, Schluter's balanced, rhythmic composition of the facades was retained, but Goth moved the main entrance to the new west wing. Frederick William I, who became king in 1713, was interested mainly in building up Prussia as a military power, and dismissed most of the craftsmen working on the Stadtschloss. As a result, Gothe's plan was only partly carried out. Nevertheless, the exterior of the palace had come close to its final form by the mid-18th century. The final stage was the erection of the dome in 1845, during the reign of Frederick William IV. The dome was built by Friedrich August Stühler after a design by Carl Friedrich Schinkel. Subsequent major works were limited to the interior, engaging the talents of Georg Wenceslaus von Nobelsdorf, Karl von Gontard and many others. The Stadtschloss was at the center of the Revolution of 1848 in Prussia. Huge crowds gathered outside the palace to present an address to the king, containing the demands for a constitution, liberal reform and German unification. Frederick William emerged from the palace to accept the demands. On the 18th of March, a large demonstration outside the Stadtschloss led to bloodshed and the outbreak of street fighting. Frederick William later reneged on his promises and reimposed an autocratic regime. For the time onwards, many Berliners and other Germans came to see the Stadtschloss as a symbol of oppression and Prussian militarism. Later history. In 1871, King William I was elevated to the status of Emperor of a united Germany, and the Stadtschloss became the symbolic center of the German Empire. The empire was, however, at least in theory, a constitutional state, and from 1894 the new Reichstag building, the seat of the German parliament, came to rival and overshadow the Stadtschloss as the center of power. In conjunction with Germany's defeat in World War I, William II was forced to abdicate both as German Emperor and as King of Prussia. In November 1918, the Spartacist leader, Karl Liebknecht, declared the German Socialist Republic from a balcony of the Stadtschloss, ending more than 400 years of royal occupation of the building. During the Weimar Republic, parts of the Stadtschloss were turned into a museum, while other parts continued to be used for receptions and other state functions. Under Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Party, which laid to rest monarchist hopes of a Hohenzollern restoration, the building was mostly ignored. During World War II, the Stadtschloss was twice struck by Allied bombs, on the 3rd of February and the 24th of February 1945. On the latter occasion, when the air defense and firefighting systems of Berlin had been destroyed, the building was struck by incendiaries, lost its roof and was largely burnt out. The end of the war saw the Stadtschloss a burned-out shell of its former glory. Although the building had remained structurally sound and much of its interior decoration was still preserved, it could have been restored, as many other bombed-out buildings in central Berlin later were. However, the area in which it was located was within the Soviet Union zone, which became the German Democratic Republic. The building was used for a Soviet war movie in which the Stadtschloss served as a backdrop, with live artillery shells fired at it for the realistic cinematic impact. The new communist regime installed in East Berlin by the Soviet Union declared the Stadtschloss a symbol of Prussian militarism. Although at the time there appeared to be no plans to destroy the building, some parts of it were in fact repaired and used from 1945 to 1950 as an exhibition space. A secret 1950 GDR Ministry of Construction report, only rediscovered in 2016, calculated that reconstruction of the damaged palace could be achieved for 32 million GDR marks. However, in July 1950, Walter Ulbricht, the new General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, announced the demolition of the palace. Despite objections, its removal commenced in September 1950, the process taking 4 months and consuming 19 tons of dynamite. So solid was its construction that the dome and its entire mound remained intact even after it fell to the ground. Only one section was preserved, a portal from the balcony of which Karl Liebknecht had declared the German Socialist Republic. It was later added to the Council of State building, with an altered cartouche, where it forms the main entrance. The empty space where the Stadtschloss had stood was named Marx-Engels-Platz and used as a parade ground. In 1964, the GDR built a new Staatsrat Council of State building on part of the site, incorporating Liebknecht's balcony in its facade. From 1973 to 1976, during the reign of Erich Honecker, a large modernist building was built, the Palast der Republik, which occupied most of the site of the former Stadtschloss. Shortly before German reunification in October 1990, the Palast der Republik was found to be contaminated with asbestos and was closed to the public. After a unification, the Berlin city government ordered the removal of the asbestos, a process which was completed by 2003. In November 2003, the German federal government decided to demolish the building and leave the area as parkland pending a decision as to its ultimate future. Demolition started in February 2006 and was completed in 2009. Some former East Germans resented the demolition, especially those for whom the Palace of the Republic had been a place of fond memories, or who felt a sense of dislocation in a post-communist world. From 2008 until the commencement of construction in 2013, the large area of original Schlossplatz became a grassed field, laid out on minimal lines with wooden platforms. At the same time, the Berlin Monument Authority undertook extensive archaeological excavations. Parts of cellars that had been situated in the southwest corner of former palace were discovered, and it was decided these would be preserved and made accessible to visitors as an archaeological window. Reconstruction. The debate. Following reunification, a 20-year-long debate commenced as to whether the palace should be reconstructed, and whether this should be in part or whole. Pro-reconstruction lobby groups argued that the rebuilding of the Stadtschloss would restore the unity and integrity of the historical center of Berlin, which includes the Berliner Dom, the Lustgarten and the museums of Museum Island. Opponents of the project included those who advocated the retention of the Palais des Républiques on the grounds that it was itself of historical significance, those who argued that the area should become a public park, and those who believed that a new building would be a pastiche of former architectural styles, would be an unwelcome symbol of Germany's imperial past, and would be unacceptably expensive for no definite economic benefit. They also argued that it would be impossible to accurately reconstruct the exterior or interiors of the building, since neither detailed plans nor the necessary craft skills are available. Others disputed this, claiming that sufficient photographic documentation of both existed when it was converted to a museum following 1918. The ideological divide was symbolized by two groups. The Association for the Preservation of the Palace of the Republic championed a renovation of the GDR building that would incorporate a recreation of the principal western facade, the City Place, for a multi-purpose people's center similar to the Centre Pompidou in Paris. The Berlin City Palace Sponsoring Association argued for complete external reconstruction of the City Palace, considering it the only option that would restore the aesthetic and historic ensemble at Berlin's heart. It also rejected suggestions that the proposed meticulous reconstruction would be an unauthentic Disney replica, drawing attention to the fact that most centuries-old stone buildings are, by dint of aging and repair, at least partial reconstructions, and that the argument that the present time can only represent itself in its own architectural language is simply ideology. It also drew attention to the Venice Charter observation that historic edifices have a material age and an immaterial significance, an importance that transcends time, and justifies the reconstruction to preserve a vital part of urban identity and historical memory, provided that sufficient documentation for a truly authentic copy exists. Towards construction, the driving force in ultimately achieving reconstruction of the Stadtschloss was a Hamburg businessman and aristocrat Wilhelm von Bodin, described as the great communicator. Until von Bodin and his associates became involved, the government had given no thought to rebuilding the entire palace. In 1992, von Bodin founded and became chairman of what evolved to be the Berlin City Palace Sponsoring Association, which became the most influential lobby group. The association accumulated plans that had been believed lost, and funded a research project at the Technical University of Berlin to measure surviving photos and drawings of the palace to create precise architectural plans. In 1993, on the world's largest scaffolding assembly, it audaciously erected a trompe-l'oeil mock-up of two frontages of the Stadtschloss facade on a 1:1 scale on plastic sheeting. Privately funded by donations and sponsorship, this coup d'etat stood for a year and a half, showing a vision of central Berlin lost for 50 years, and how the palace could provide the missing link to the historical ensemble of the Zethhaus, the Altes Museum, and a Berlin cathedral. The spectacle brought the debate to a temporary climax in 1993 quarters. While opinion continued to remain divided, it succeeded in winning over many politicians and other key figures for the endeavor. In view of the previous opposition, including high costs, and most importantly, the psychological and political objections, successive German governments had declined to commit themselves to the project. However, by 2002 and 2003, cross-party resolutions of the Bundestag reached a compromise to support at least a partial rebuilding of the Stadtschloss. In 2007, the Bundestag made a definitive decision about the reconstruction. According to this compromise, which had been drawn up by commission, 3 facades of the palace would be rebuilt, but the interior would be a modern structure to serve as a cultural museum. museum and forum. An architectural competition was held, and in 2008 the jury chose the submission by Italian architect Franco Stella. Some of the internal spaces in Stella's design follow the exact proportions of the original staterooms of the palace, so as to facilitate the reconstruction at a later date should this be desired. The reconstruction also reproduces the original meter-thick width of the outer walls. However, these have been rebuilt as a sandwiched construction, an inner retaining wall of concrete, followed by a layer of insulation, and an outer wall of brick, sandstone and stucco which replicates the original. Reconstruction of the Renaissance gabled pharmacy wing, which connected to the Stadtschloss on the north side, would be another possible future project. Due to German government budget cuts, construction of the Humboldt Forum, as the new palace was titled, was delayed. The foundation stone was finally laid by President Joachim Gauck in a ceremony on 12 June 2013, signaling the launch of a €590 million reconstruction project. On completion in 2019, the building will house a modern museum containing collections of African and other non-European art, as well as 2 restaurants, a theater, a movie theater and an auditorium. Donations continue to be sought for the Baroque facade decoration by Ford in Berliner Schloss, which is funding this part of the reconstruction.